Welcome to the Knights of Awakening interview series. In this video, we talk with Ben Abba again, this time concerning remote viewing. In a previous interview we had with Ben, he talked about Secrets of an Immortal. He had mentioned on that show that remote viewing was a powerful tool that he used to track down many of the quote-unquote immortals that he had found throughout the last couple of years. We brought Ben back to the Knights of Awakening so that he can share with us his thoughts and techniques on remote viewing. We hope you like this video. If you do, give it a like. Thanks for watching, and until next time, awaken the night within.
Let's get this show on the road. Mr. Abba, you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, beautifully. How are you this afternoon?
Great. Enjoying a fun Sunday afternoon with some football, and I got very interested in talking about this topic today, and I'm glad we have a good chance to get together and spend a little time going into that. What we didn't get a chance to talk on Friday.
Yeah, we were hoping we didn't push you too hard to do a show today. We don't like to make anybody feel uncomfortable or whatever. But we're certainly glad that you could come back and join us again Sunday.
You did catch me by surprise, but I'm glad I could make it. And it was an afternoon which I had time off, and would very much enjoy the conversation this afternoon that we're planning to have.
Right. I remember on Friday you said that part of your researching techniques in finding these folks for your book was part of it was remote viewing. Is that correct?
Exactly. Remote viewing played a big part in my ability to find and locate and successfully make contact with these unique people.
So I guess without further ado, some of us think we know what remote viewing is. I'm not sure if I even have a correct view on or definition of remote viewing. Maybe you can take us through just what that is.
All right, let me tell you a brief definition of what remote viewing is, and then tell you and kind of explain to you my way of finding out about it, and then maybe we'll go into some of what I learned the first few days when I was taking the training courses. Sure. with Major Ed Daines. Remote viewing was basically a skill that was developed by the United States government, Department of Defense, CIA, and I believe what department called Defense Intelligence Agency, which is DIA, all worked with Sanford University to create a skill. The program was developed by Ingo Swann. So Ingo Swann is a natural psychic that created a technique that they could teach non-psychic people, in particular in the military, to perform, which essentially is psychic spying, an ability to sit in a blank room and essentially spy on our enemies or locate military targets with fairly good accuracy for the United States government. The program, I was not involved with the military whatsoever. I wasn't involved or have an intimate knowledge of what exactly they were looking for or what exactly they found, other than the stories that I've heard by the various people that were in that military program, and then they've now come out and made some of their stories public. However, I did find out that they were very successful in a lot of their attempts to locate targets. They somewhere in the 90s, probably late 80s, early 90s, decided because of political reasons that this was not a good, let's say, skill or technique to fund with public money. So they decided to drop the program. Supposedly, I don't believe that's totally true, but they decided to drop the program, and several of these people that were involved in the program began teaching it to the public. I think Major Ed Daines was the first that I was aware of that actually started to teach the public courses. I heard him on a radio station. We'll talk about Art Bell. Brought him on after ABC did a Nightline special on Major Ed Daines. And the techniques he was describing, to me, sounded like very reasonably could be actually a real thing. It was like he didn't come across as being like I'm a dial a psychic type of person. He talked about how he taught people in the military who were not natural psychics the ability to locate targets. And as I was growing up in my life, I always considered myself having a little bit of a gut feelings, somewhat of an intuition, but being a psychic is about a wet paper bag. I just did not conceive myself of ever being a professional psychic whatsoever. So when I heard this program on Art Bell, I started to think there's maybe something to this, and there could be an enormous benefits if this skill actually did work. So I immediately enrolled in the program and ended up being one of his first students.
Mr. Abba.
I think it was like the second or third class that he taught.
Mr. Abba, at this point, I would like to ask you the question that I ask all people that are talking about psychic abilities and whatnot. Can anybody learn this?
Absolutely. In fact, that's what I'm trying to say to you is, if I can learn it, anybody can learn this skill.
Right.
As far as I was concerned, I have met a few natural psychics, and they're extraordinary. I no doubt about it. But what I saw and what I experienced learning the skill, everyone can do it, and they're teaching it now on weekends. But I took the 2-week course to basically learn a skill that they've now kind of, let's say, packaged to be more easily to learn and a little more fun to learn and quicker to learn as well.
Okay.
Well, it's certainly like watching Michael Jordan shoot basketball. You know, I mean, there are people out there who just was born and just there was no doubt in anybody's mind that he would play basketball, and he does it better than anybody else. And I always liken that to you know what you just said about psychics and other people who have different abilities. Some people are just right off the bat just gifted, and then there are others who have to really work at it and kind of learn it.
Oh, exactly. I kind of think of it like being a quarterback in football. Even your natural psychics will have their good days and their bad days. And with this skill, you can learn to compensate for it. And I'll explain as we just go in a little bit how this works, where you can compensate for having one or two people having a bad day, yet still have a successful session and get highly accurate results. So do you want me to go into maybe a little bit more as to how the technique kind of works and maybe my experiences in class and stuff? Well, again, I went to Major Ed Dame's class. It was I was there with a couple other students, and it was basically we spent the entire day learning what we call the skills. And the skills are, in a sense, it's a matter of just doodling. You kind of think, well, why would doodling have anything to do with it? Well, the point of the doodling is you put your thoughts into a piece of paper, and as you start taking the class, you realize how powerful that tool is. The hardest part, in my mind, of remote viewing is basically shutting off your mind for 1 second and listening. That's the hardest part to me, because I always have 3 or 4 things going on in my mind at one time. So that was, to me, going to be the most difficult challenge. The first day, at the end of the first day, he would teach us techniques, and we would practice a few let's just say, practice doodling, as strange as that sounds. But at the end of the day, he put a sealed envelope in front of me, and I performed the task exactly as he taught them to me. It took about an hour to do an average session, and especially when you're starting off, it's going to take that long. But at the end of the session, I drew a picture, and didn't understand what it was. It felt like to me like a cliff or something. And he pulled out a picture. It's that mountain from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And if I took my picture and put it over his picture, in the exact angle that was sitting on the table there, it would look like I actually sketched the mountain from that picture on the paper. Now I had no idea if that was an object, a person, a place, or a thing, or something from the past or the future. But yet I drew exactly what was in that envelope. And the only thing I knew was a couple of numbers that he basically gave me to identify supposedly in our, he calls it the matrix, in the universe, what that picture was. So at that first day, drawing that picture and realizing, I went into total shock. I mean, it was like, here I am thinking I'm not psychic, and I just drew like I sketched a picture on my piece of paper.
Right.
It was truly amazing, and so that kind of convinced me that there was no voodoo ceremony. We didn't play music. There was no chimes. There were no breathing in strange substances or taking weird drugs. None of that. It was sitting in a white room, listening to a crazy man teach me how to doodle, and that's basically what it started out to be.
Well, the doodling was the ritual, wasn't it?
Well, in a sense, that's about it. It's the doodling. And let me kind of go a little bit into what remote viewing is. Again, I'm not an official member of Major Ed Dane's team or anyone else's team. I learned the program, went through it, studied it, and I occasionally will audit one of the weekend classes. But for the most part, I'm not part of the organization at all. So I'm not giving you official representation. I need to give you that disclaimer.
Sure.
But
thank you for that.
In my opinion, there's 4 parts. In my scientific third-party opinion, there's 4 parts to remote viewing. The first part is cueing, and think of cueing as like putting in what you're looking for in a search engine. If you put in too few words, you're going to get lots of results, and you're going to get all sorts of garbage. If you put too many words, you're not going to get any results. So it's a skill just to get the question just right. How do you want to cue what you're looking for? And I think Major Ed Danes was one of the best in teaching that class and that particular skill. And as I was in my experiences with him, he's even evolved that even further, because there was a couple times when he gave me a target that I found something that matched the cue but didn't match what he was looking for. So that's something that is kind of important, and it actually is very important if you want to get the exact results, is to we call cue the target or put the right search engine terms for what you're looking for. That's number 1. The number 2 part is the data collection, and I firmly believe that using the skills I learned from Major Ed Danes, I was able to 100% of the time get data, get valid data. The problem is sometimes you write this data down, it's like a doodle and a bunch of words, and you don't quite know exactly what it is you're writing down, but at least you're getting the data. So I think that his skill, his techniques, for sure, were very accurate data on what it is that we're looking for, whatever was cued that we're looking for. The third part of remote viewing is basically analysis, and this is where people get in trouble. We all have our own opinions, we all have our beliefs, and sometimes we'll look at something, and I looked at this picture and thought it was a cliff, and here it was a mountain. All I had to do was turn the picture 90 degrees, and there it was a mountain. But to me, it was a cliff because it looked kind of strange, and it was pointing to the side. I wasn't sure what it was. It just felt like something that was definitely a hill or rock, but I didn't feel like it was a mountain. But yet, I put it over a picture of a mountain. It sure was. It was a mountain. And then the fourth part of remote viewing is collaboration. It's basically what we try to do is have other remote viewers look at the same target at the same time, and then we put what they find together what we find, because everybody looks at something different. You can have 3 or 4 people witnessing a traffic accident and see 4 different things, And so we want different people to combine this evidence. I think the average remote viewer on the whole is about 75 to 85% accurate with one session. If you get a group of 4 or more together, you're going to get 100% accuracy. That's why the collaboration is very important. However, if you collaborate with people with the same kind of belief system, sometimes they're going to see all the same thing, and then you're going to run into some trouble there. One of the things that Major Ed Danes is noted for is he's basically known as Dr. Doom. Well, he likes to see what I call the dark side of the cloud or the dark side of the coin, so to speak. And I have a very positive outlook on life, so I'm just the opposite. So I will see the opposite what he sees just about every target we look at. Well, the good thing is you want to have a combination of both to get your 100% accuracy, because he might see something that I didn't see, and I'll see something that he didn't see. But for the most part, we are seeing the same object. We're just looking at it from different angles. And so that's where collaboration is very important. You want to get a variety of people to collaborate to get your 100% accuracy, and also to get, obviously, more data. Because another thing, too, is if you have a background, say I have a background in physics, and I'm looking at something that's biology, I might have more difficulty understanding it than a doctor in biology would. But then he would have difficulty looking at something clearly as a has to do with like the something that's a physics project. So the background of the person is important when you look at doing analysis and collaboration. And that's kind of in a nutshell what remote viewing is. I would like to answer a few questions. Then I was thinking of maybe going in through some of my sessions, which will give you a better understanding of some of the crazy things we discovered when we were doing some of this remote viewing sessions, if that's all right with you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, David.
Sure.
Let me make a couple points just to kind of reiterate what Ben said real quick, and then you give some points maybe, and bring in our caller real quick. We've had a caller on hold since the beginning of the show. I just want to reiterate a couple things that were key for me, Ben, was that learning what I've learned about you, not only from Friday but from today as well. You're kind of a scientific guy, so it was important for you to point out, I think, your thoughts on it too, because some people who are scientifically minded are strictly scientifically minded, and they don't want to hear any of this stuff that could kind of float off into the metaphysical. But the other thing that was important for you to point out was the fact that it's not some voodoo dance, and these aren't people wearing robes and all this stuff. These are just regular people like you and me.
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly. And I have, being from a traditional household, I have a Christian background, and so I didn't want to get involved with the dark occult or any of that kind of stuff, and I never saw any of that there. In fact, quite just the opposite. So to me, again, this isn't performing rituals or of any type of witchcraft or that kind of stuff. It's basically a skill, just as if you were trying to do a calculation, or just if you're trying to do is develop a product or idea using standard methods, or just even modern detective skills. It was a very valuable skill, and it was developed in a scientific manner, and scientists like me could understand it and grasp it and actually make use of it, and it was invaluable, a very invaluable tool.
Just quick before we bring in that caller, I would like to add that I come from a Christian background too, but I also come from an occult background too. So the methods that you're describing they're right on the money as far as how the mind works. First, you got to get your internal language right. You got to find words that kind of key in on what you're wanting to do, so that your subconscious mind can lock on. The collecting data part, you're giving your mind points that are certain, so it kind of locks you in on reality, not just some kind of subjective feeling that you may have about it. The analysis I'm not too sure about. I know there's thought processes that go into everything. You have to weigh everything up and down, and figure out what is what. But I'm kind of hazy on that one, because I missed a lot of what you were saying because I was typing. But the collaboration, working in numbers, everything that you mentioned is identical to the methods that are used in occultism and in the church on Sunday. When two or more come together, in belief, that's straight out of the Bible. I may have misworded it, but that's the essential essence of it, is that when people work together, they create a power that is stronger than one person working on it. And while you were talking, I did remember Ed Dames or his crew, or some group like that. I'm not sure if it was him or anybody from his organization, but there was a man in a plane that had went down, a rich man. I can't remember his name now, and nobody could find him, right?
Oh, Forsett, yeah, that Forsett guy.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And all these guys were trying to find them, and they come on coast to coast, and they're talking about their techniques, and sure enough, they have guys. I'm not kidding. He's not talking about a room of 3 or 4 of your good buddies. These people have like 20 people, 40 people, 60 people, all concentrating on one particular mission. And when you put that much energy together, stuff happens. And if you've ever been to a rock and roll concert, you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
So let's bring in that caller. All right. Where were we? Guys?
Well, I'll go back to a couple of points you made earlier before taking the question. Steve Fawcett, I believe, was a gentleman that Major Ed and his team use a new technique that they were developed since I've taken their classes to locate them. And ironically, I did work. There were just a very quick remote viewing session on where Steve Fawcett was, and I'm using the old techniques, the ones that Major Ed originally taught. And my target was actually closer to where the real crash site was than what his new technique was. So I kind of ironically kind of make fun of him. I guess the new one's kind of got a little bit of kinks to work out, but his old technique was very, very, very close. So I have to again give him credit for teaching me the older technique, which I thought was again very much closer to where the actual crash site was. And I think both of us were within a very short distance. It's kind of sad that they took them so long to realize that, but it was a very valuable technique, and you got to admit it pointed to an area that nobody was looking for, the crash site.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So going back a little bit on my experiences with the remote viewing, again, the first day I drew this one particular target, and as the class developed over time, the major is kind of a practical joker, so he would throw in and out some kind of really strange targets. I was going to kind of go through some of those targets and kind of tell you what my impression of them was, and then what the actual result was, and that'll kind of give you an idea of some of this. We talked about the analysis, where it's basically where you're looking at what you got for a remote viewing session and trying to figure out what it is. And when you do it yourself, it's very difficult. It's sometimes because your own opinions, your own mind gets in the way, and it tries to think it's something very, what should I say, something very natural for you, but it may actually be something totally different, but just looks like something natural for you. A case in point, I worked a target, and I ended up drawing a city, a very bustling city, that had something, had cars and basically lots of traffic in it. And I felt it was basically of current time. It was actually of the present, but I couldn't tell where that city was. I just felt like I was drawing a city. I didn't know where the location was. And that time I hadn't learned all the skills about locating different objects. Well, the target was a lip on a crater near Cydonia on Mars. And what the major told me is that everyone that's remote viewed that has picked up a living, viable city, but they can't pick up, who's living there. They just pick up that there's a city there that's still is still active today. And the feeling I got, it was a very mechanical city, like it was like robots that was roaming the city, not so much people. But it definitely was an active city, and that was that one particular target. So again, without collaboration, without some kind of knowing a little bit about the target I was looking for, I never would have guessed it was a city on Mars. I just figured it was a city here on Earth. But that was one of the targets that they presented me with. A good example of the cueing issue is one of his targets I drew myself sitting on a beach with a laptop and a cell phone. And, I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. It's kind of like my dream job, sitting on a beach.
Right.
Have a little laptop and, make a few phone calls, do a few things on the computer, and then spend the rest of the day just enjoying the sun. Well, the target was an empty envelope. All it had the words was New York Stock Exchange. Well, the major came up to me and said, you're way off target. You completely missed this target. I'm sorry, you screwed up. And I said, no, I did. I'm 100% on the target. I said, this is my dream job, sitting on the beach with a cell phone and a laptop and straight trading stocks and making money and doing it for a few minutes each day and then having the rest of the day off. And so he kind of scratched his head, and I said, what was it you thinking I should have been drawing? Was it the building? Was it the actual floor? And so that's where I was telling you where the cueing of the target is very important, because as far as I was concerned, I was 100% on target.
Right.
But what he was intending for me to draw was 100% off target, because at that point in time, the New York Stock Exchange was going from a physical building to work with brokers to basically a virtual business where people were trading stocks over the internet at the time. And I was very much aware of that. And again, that was part of my occupation. So it was, that's where it became very clear how cueing is very critical to locating different targets. Was there any other questions on there? I'll go for a couple more interesting things if you want.
It is dependent on translation of the mind, though. because you as a remote viewer, if I asked you to pinpoint a target, you may have come up with that image, but if you analyzed it, you would have told me that it has something to do with the stock market or business, doing business in a virtual environment, sitting on a beach somewhere like that. So whenever we think of, we have all these associations. Everybody associates differently, So if you take any given target and you ask 100 people what comes to mind when you see this, you're going to get 100 different answers. But yet, if you reverse it, I guess the goal of remote viewing would be to somehow interpret that image that you get into an understandable format so that you can find the actual target itself, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. By the way, I saw in the chat room the caller left her question, and if you leave me a little time at the end of this, I'll even stay later if you want. At the end of our interview today, I'll answer her question for her. There's too much to say in the chat room. If you give me about 5 minutes, I'll give a good answer to that question.
Sure. Before I ask my question, I'd be interested to hear some more of those examples you were talking about, because so far, I myself would think that was quite amazing that everybody seen some sort of city when they're supposed to be looking at some empty crater on a faraway planet. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, it was bizarre to me. And again, I was there, and that was one of the targets we had to draw. But I had no knowledge ahead of time that there was such a city on Mars, or could even be such a city on Mars. One of the things that came up, there's so many different targets. One of the things that a lot of the other students were drawing in the class, one particular student that was in the class with me was dealing with some health issues. I think it was a particular incurable disease. I can't remember if it was a cancer or something similar like that. And he ended up drawing a flower. Well, later in the class, we researched the flower. And it's one of those we did figure out. I can't remember the name of it, but it's one of those that's not very well known. But there's a flower that actually he picked up on that no one's ever tried to figure out if there's a potential cure for a disease. But he picked up in his remote viewing session that the cure for his disease that he had at that moment in time was something to do with this flower. So I don't know where the research went, but that's kind of a typical thing where you can benefit from these remote viewing sessions. You can actually find the cure, whatever disease you have at that time. Again, if you get to a point in time where you're just about 2 minutes from dying, it's going to be difficult to get cured. But if you have a disease and you're catching at early stages, or even at halfway, midway through, there is a recovery period, and one of these people, that's what a lot of these doctors do. Now, I had this. If I had drawn that flower, I would have no clue what it means or how aspect. But thinking about, because I have some knowledge in herbs now, it's very likely there's something to do with that flower, and I would basically go ahead and research that particular flower, try to get as much information about it, and if possible or necessary, I would take 2 or 3 remote viewers, and we all together would find out what we need to do to get that flower to give us the information that we need to create that cure. So there is a very much a great power, or I should say a great advantage of using remote viewing to find medical, you'd say, treatments and cures for different, illnesses and diseases. One of the sessions I should bring up, which to me was another major milestone in my life, was a session which this gentleman and I were working on together. And let me kind of set the stage here, a little bit of the context. I was again taking this original course with 2 other gentlemen. One of them used to run casinos. He was kind of like the casino manager and very heavily involved in investing money. And since he was recently retired. Another gentleman that I attended the class was a natural healer. Now, I've never met a natural healer before, and that just fascinated me. So I wanted to learn more about his healing techniques and try to prompt him to, teach me what classes he had. But and he made his money also trading stocks and bonds and currencies. Now that he kind of semi-retired from this healing business, and so I would offer myself to buy him breakfast each morning just to see if I could, plug him for information how they make their money, what their occupation was, and of course the gentleman that was natural healer, there's a lot to ask of him. So I asked questions of his, how his techniques were. But one morning we were at breakfast, and the original courses that Major Ed taught were in downtown Beverly Hills, of all places. Well, I don't know if you know anything about Beverly Hills, but it's got the most beautiful cars, the most beautiful people, the most beautiful stores, the most beautiful everything there. So you're, a farm boy from the Midwest going down there, it's like culture shock. And so I'm sitting there looking around like, wow, where did I end up? It's like being on another planet for all practical purposes. So we get back from breakfast, and I'm actually what's called the monitor. I'm auditing or watching him do this session, and he's basically performing the skills of doing a remote viewing session. And as he goes through the skills and such, I get a little bored kind of easily, and I started daydreaming. Well, I started daydreaming about the things I saw in Beverly Hills, and the cars, the people, and the stores, and all of a sudden this guy is starting to write some of that stuff down, and I'm going, wait a minute, that's kind of weird. So I'm thinking, well, maybe he's remote viewing Beverly Hills, and he doesn't know it because he's putting all the stuff I've been daydreaming about that we just saw this morning. And this session turned out to be a very long session, and then what the Major decided to do was break us in the middle of the session. So we never did finish all of it, and so he said, let's take a break, and you two guys go to lunch. So we went to lunch together, and I'm sitting there having lunch with this other student who was doing the session. I said, boy, I could have swore you're writing down exactly everything I'm thinking, kind of what I'm daydreaming about. It's about Beverly Hills, and I'm wondering if I'm influencing you. Maybe I've got some incredible brain power or brain waves there, or you're whatever. So we're going to go back and we decided we're going to go tell the Major that that I'm actually influencing the session. And sure enough, we go back, and the Major says, "Oh, don't worry about it, no big deal." So we start the session again. He's still doing some more, let's say, data gathering, and he's writing things down, and they're doing different angles. You can make these sessions last 2 or 3 hours if you really wanted to get very thorough. Well, during that next period, I got up and went to the bathroom, came back, and drank some water, and this gentleman's writing down, feeling better now, and feeling relieved, and he talks about I'm feeling wetness and water, and I'm going, oh, man, this is a weird session. Well, we finally ended the session, and basically it was a blank envelope with my name on it. And now, let me go, this is huge. What this technique that the Major taught me, and I don't know why he doesn't teach it as a separate technique, it's essentially is remote sending. I was sending information, in a sense, to another remote viewer, kind of like telepathy, and he was actually picking it up. What I was sending out, what I was thinking about, he was picking up the thoughts. And so obviously he wasn't drawing me as a physical entity. He was picking up what I was thinking, my thoughts, what I was doing, and in a sense he was basically spying in a sense on me, but also we were communicating, because towards the end of the session I started sending particular thoughts, and he'd start, because I'm curious, there's obviously some influence going on here, and he's writing these things down. So it's obvious that there is a connection there. So another technique that I learned as part of remote viewing is this technique I can send information to another human being, and then using remote viewing I can receive the answers, in a sense. So that was kind of a very powerful tool as well.
Let me ask you, I know of a lot of folks who find techniques like astral projection to be very, very close to remote viewing. In your opinion, because you've done this, I have never purposely done remote viewing, whether I've done it on accident or not, but what is your thought on how close or how different something like astral projection is to remote viewing?
Well, I think that of all the things that you can say is the closest to it, you've heard of these, they call water witches, dowsers, and such, and there's some similarities there. But again, what's the problem with a lot of those techniques is they're not disciplined, they're not structured, And I noticed that when I stay to structure, I get the highest accuracy of results. Where I get out of structure is when I start running into trouble. Or if I start trying to locate things and make, like for instance, I know what my target is, and I want it to be a certain answer. If you almost got to get your brain out of it when you're doing your session, because your brain sometimes fights you throughout the session trying to understand or figure out what is it you're trying to do, and then it gets to the point where it's almost impossible to fight your brain to get the actual answer. So sometimes that's what's going on here. Did I answer that question of yours?
Sure, yeah.
And these remote viewers, they are enlisted by government agencies and whatnot to work on crimes, correct? I mean, this isn't just a hobby or nothing like that. There's a practical application for all of this.
Yes, there's a couple of well-known remote viewers, and the major is included, that use their skills to locate impossible to solve crimes. What's it called? One gentleman, I think it's the extra witness, or he has another name for it. But basically, yes, you can solve unsolved crimes. You can solve mystery. I like to do scientific mysteries, and one of the first things I did is after the class was to track down Bigfoot, to see if there really was a Bigfoot, where they lived, and what they were doing, all that kind of stuff. So I was trying to do all these techniques on. That's the first thing I did. I was always curious about the Bigfoot and if there was something to it or not. So that's why I went ahead and pushed going out that way. But there's also other techniques you can use too, like actually, like you say, finding clues on unsolved crimes, finding missing people. They've done many experiments finding missing people that were difficult to find, and as well as missing objects, missing treasures.
Sure.
The one thing that kind of intrigues me about this, now all the examples you gave seem to be, at the moment, right now, type of, when remote viewing, is it possible to transcend any other barriers like time or space? Is it possible to see perhaps an event from the past, or an event from a maybe a probable future or something?
No, we did a lot of those as well. We remote view the crucifixion. Of course, you can remote view the end of the world. One of the things I remote viewed, of course, was my death. I wanted to see what my death would be like. How did I die? When did it take place and such? Because I wanted to change it. I wanted to know what it was that caused my death, and that's one of the reasons that prompted me to. Also, I thought I died too young of an age, so that's what prompted me to look for, the secrets of an immortality and find people that extended their lives. And that's, I know it's kind of gruesome. In fact, they kind of recommend you don't remote view your death, but I firmly believe that if you do, that with the circumstances, you can change them and you can extend it out. And I've done that since then. And yes, I've extended my own life by incorporating some of what I've learned from the 2,800-year-old gentleman, which I talked about on Friday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that would be kind of freakish for some people to see their own death. I think it's easier for most people to just kind of hide in fear of it. And that was a pretty good point. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to face these types of seemingly natural fears that are inbred into us from the time we're born, from our parents and people around us. So that was certainly an interesting experiment there.
Yes, and so you can definitely look in the future if you want to look at future events, but be aware you're looking at what the future would be if everything that's supposed to happen happens as accordingly. Once you look into the future, there's a belief you've already changed the future. And again, right. I looked at what my future was, and then I made a conscious attempt to change my future, and I believe that I successfully did so. And so when you're looking at future events, it's very likely that what you saw yesterday in the future may not be tomorrow in the future. You look at it and see tomorrow in the future. On the other hand, looking in the past, very likely that is the past, unless you believe that we can also change our past, and then that's another thing that could be, and we could be discussing this philosophical question for the rest of the evening is can
right.
we change our past, can we change our future, and can we change, what do we see when we look at both of them? But for the most part, when you look in the past, you're seeing what happened, and look in the future, what's going to happen unless you make a change. That's how I would look at it.
Okay, we're drawing down to the last bit there. So we were going to ask you for your take home on remote viewing, and then get you to answer the questions that have been posted in the chat room there, if you don't mind, sir.
Well, I'm going to put a plug in for Major Ed Dane's website. It's learnrv.com. I also learned some techniques from a guy named Courtney Brown. He has what's called Associated Remote Viewing. I don't know what his current website is. And I also learned what's called Intuitive Remote Viewing from a gentleman named Sean David Morton. And his website is delphiassociates.com. I'll try to put that in the chat room as well. I just don't know what Courtney Brown's was. I just took one quick class from him. There's also a group of remote viewers called the rvconference.org, and that's where all the professional remote viewers get together, all the big names off and on, and you'll find a lot of them there that you can find take classes with, and they also have usually some reduced rate classes while you attend there. And again, my main website is benabba.com, benabba.com, and I can give you, I spelled that wrong. I'll give you some more information about remote viewing on that website in a future post.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's certainly something that you have now made me more interested in, now that I have a better understanding of what it is and how it works, and I wanted to thank you for that. You know, I find each and every week I just add more things to learn on my list, and now you've helped me add another one. So.
Oh, it's quite amazing. It's definitely quite amazing. And again, the skills, I just highly went over it. One of the things people are using this, they use it to play lotteries and betting and stuff, and there's some people have been successful at it. I've never been a successful gambler, never tried to be, but there's always I suppose a business in that as well. A lot of people use remote viewing for picking stocks and bonds. I've done some of that with fairly good success. Let me kind of go over a little bit, if you want, how that works, if you want to give a better understanding. A technique, and this came out after my classes with the major, is what's called associate remote viewing, and for the most part, what that is they would put, when we try to remote view numbers, it's almost impossible. So, or remote viewing sometimes even objects, winners or losers, is almost impossible. So what people would do is put an object associated with a number. So, for instance, you want to know if Google stock is going to go up tomorrow or go down tomorrow. They would associate, say, an object, maybe a pet, a stuffed lion, with going up, and a cup or a plate if it's going down. And then you would view the object, and so what you're looking for is, what object would the person that looked at the paper tomorrow, instead of it's up or down, what object are they going to be holding in their hand? And the object will be either the lion or the cup. And so they would remote view the object that you're holding, and if it's you draw the cup, then you know that the Google stock is going down tomorrow. And you can do that for like red and blue when you do some gambling, or sometimes you can do that with numbers. It's difficult, but they do have a way of doing it in numbers. I've had I'd say 50-50 luck with numbers exactly, but looking at objects, oh yeah, I can do that very well. And one of the sessions, maybe I should bring this up for you, that we did long ago was to pick a winning team on a Super Bowl. And this was in a weekend class. I was auditing the class at the time, and it was just I was testing out some new techniques that I wanted to test out. So in the class, there's a weekend class, and the first picture they had in the class, I drew a picture of looked to me like a missile coming to Earth, and I picked up fear, death, and lots of pain and such. And this was after the 9/11 attacks. So I thought, well, maybe I must be tuning in on a terrorist attack. Well, it turned out the picture was a roller coaster going down, and there was people on there afraid, and of course, there's lots of fear, but it's also funny, and so it was kind of a really it was, the roller coaster looked kind of like a missile, but it was a roller coaster. So I'm thinking, oh, I must have been really off. I got the data, but the analysis was just really off and such, and I couldn't quite understand it. Well, the next day we tried to predict the winning Super Bowl, which was going to be the weekend afterwards. Now, the two teams at that particular time that were playing in the Super Bowl was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Oakland Raiders. I don't know if you remember that was a while back ago.
Oh no, you're gonna make me relive this over again. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so we had to pick what was it, and so the cueing was what's the most significant object or significant thing in that state of the winning team that's going to win the Super Bowl. Well, most of the people picked Cape Canaveral, which was associated with Tampa Bay, but about a third of the people in that class drew the exact same picture which I drew for the roller coaster, which is a missile coming to Earth, pain, fear, destruction, and I'm just scratching my head going, well, what the heck is going on here? So the consensus of the class is that Tampa Bay was going to win, and we predicted this a week ahead of time, and sure enough, Tampa Bay did win the Super Bowl. But if you remember right, about 3 or 4 days before Tampa Bay won, the Columbia shuttle crashed to Earth.
Right.
So some of the associates and our class assistants and I discussed this afterwards, and we're wondering if we're also picking up this crash mixed in with some of our results, because it did come up in a couple of sessions, like I mentioned for me. We don't know. We just kind of shocked by the whole thing, but I was definitely picking up something with people coming to ground with some fear and some death going on, and it still to this day amazes me why we picked that up. I didn't quite understand what was happening, but we did also predict the right Super Bowl winner in that class.
Right. Well, I think you had me in mind for that Super Bowl year, because I felt like I had been killed 3 times over when I watched my team get just utterly destroyed.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know the story by that, but anyway, but the point is that we could successfully pick the right team. We just picked up some other results of a future event that we weren't sure what was going on, and then sure enough, it popped in our lives certainly thereafter.
All right, let's go ahead and David, we want to go ahead and take care of that question that Elf had a little bit earlier, and
yeah.
Ben, you said you needed a few minutes to kind of go through that. The question was, did you ever learn about the view of the immortal friend and how the status of women has changed over the centuries?
Well, there's a lot to say on that one. Let's see. I want to tell you a story. I think it's okay for me to tell you that I learned from this gentleman, which will kind of answer your question. It's, I think, an incredibly valuable story, and it kind of relates to what we talked about and a lot of things we didn't talk about on Friday. This gentleman told me that one of the things that Christ was very much involved with was some of the political activities or political, let's say, topics of the time, and one that was very much a very big part of what Christ was involved with 2,000 years ago was the fact that at that time widows and women could not own property. And if you think about this for a moment, a lot of times when soldiers would go to war and they would die, or for some reason a husband died of an illness, all the property would go to the state. They couldn't leave it to their widows unless their child was an adult. They wouldn't get their property as well. This is one of the reasons why a lot of the widows sometimes would often have to marry the brother or a relative of the their husbands, because they just simply didn't have. They were destitute as soon as the husband passed away, and
right.
It was a very big problem back 2,000 years ago. And so what this gentleman said is one of the basic, I should say, the right word slipped my mind. One of the things that the Christ was really pushing hard for and actually made contact with the emperor at the time was to get the right for women to own the property of their dead husbands. And it was a very big political issue, hot issue at that time. I think he partially succeeded, but I know it was a very hot topic at the time that actually may have led to the crucifixion as well as all the religious aspects as well. And so what he's seen is this has been an ongoing issue for many, many years. But as you now know, women did eventually get the right to own property, in particular inherit the property of their husband when the husband passed away. So I kind of think that's a good story. It kind of wraps up that question fairly well.
Mr. Abba, I don't want to hold you longer than what you agreed to, but I have one more question, and it's just
Sure.
I would just end up kicking myself if I didn't ask you. Everything is, it's a matter of direction, okay? Everything that we've discussed so far is basically meta understanding, as if there's a reality out there, and we are coming up with systems to be able to understand. We're understanding stuff that we shouldn't be able to understand. That doesn't have anything to do with us projecting our will out into that reality. Do you have any comments on like Fire the Grid and projects like that bring people together to send out a message of will and actually change reality itself? Do you have any comments on that kind of stuff?
Well, we talked about the one remote viewing session about how to send information, basically somewhat influencing another person using, what I was thinking at the time.
Right.
As far as remote influence is concerned, well, we have the will to do a lot of things, and it's certainly a possibility. I haven't really fully attempted to do that yet, other than just communicate with other people, my beliefs, what my findings are in my research. So I think by my doing this, the blog, the interviews, and finally the book, I'm going to be doing influencing, but not so much as a mental exercise, more so as a entire, physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental exercise. So it's a combination of all the above. I think we can definitely influence people, but technically, I shouldn't say technically, theoretically, it is a possibility that could be done.
Okay, we're coming to a hard stop. I'll let Justin close the show, and see you guys next week. I have nothing to add.
Ben, thanks again. We really appreciate you taking this at the last second. It does mean a lot to us, and I want to personally thank you for giving me something new to look for and something new to research on.
Well, thank you. This show went really fast again. Wow, this has been quite fun. It's just going to zip by. It's like, whoa, why did we just start this? And here we are. It's already an hour. That's quite remarkable. Yeah, well, I'd love to do it again sometime in the future, and we'll definitely look forward to. Like I said, we just barely brushed on the surface of both topics, and there's so much more we can talk about in the future.